Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule this afternoon to join us to learn a little bit more about credit card processing within Sage 100. My name is Sherry Simmerman. I'm with DWD Technology Group. We are a Sage 100 partner located in Northeast Indiana. We're always trying to find integrated solutions for Sage 100 users that'll help them to achieve efficiencies. And today we're going to learn a little bit more about Century Business Solutions Integrated Credit Card Processing Solution. Justin Giltner will be presenting for us. Go ahead and take it away, Justin.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is walk through some of the basic workflows you would have for running transactions. So there's a few different options when you're going through like your sales order to invoice process, and then we'll always have the ability to pay invoices after the fact as well. So I'm going to start off with the standard sales order entry. And you would be able to technically authorize cards up front if that's something that we were looking to do, to put like a pending hold. Or of course you can take deposits at the time of the order if we're going to do like a straight sale up front as well. So most of this initial process is your standard Sage. We'll go ahead and create an order here with a customer and select whatever item they might be purchasing. So this would all be your out of the box process here. When you get to your totals tab, you'll have a deposit payment type. So if we're going to want to run any sort of credit card transaction up front, we would have the ability to select credit card as the payment method here. On the fifth payment tab, you would have the payment ID number, which is sort of like the reference to any credit cards on file. So if this happened to be a repeat customer, let me move that out of the way here. If this happened to be a repeat customer, we could do a lookup under the payment ID and it would show me a list of any cards that we might have. This is a bit excessive because it's a test environment, but maybe you have like 1 or 2 cards on file. So I could select a card from here. It'll fill in the form for me. So all I'd really be doing is running the payment. However, if there was no card, I would have the ability to create a new payment ID. So I'm going to just make one up here. Under the payment types, we would set you up with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, whatever you're accepting. If anyone currently processes credit cards in Sage and would be switching over to eBiz, we can generally piggyback off of payment types that you may already have set up in the system as well. So once we have that done, you would click Add New Card in the credit card maintenance window, which will give you the secure eBiz form to fill in the card number. So keep in mind, from a compliance standpoint, none of this card info is getting stored locally within your Sage database. All of it is housed through the online payment gateway, so that way it meets up to compliance standards for you. The only thing you really have back inside of Sage itself is the actual reference number to that card. So, well, let me go ahead and pull that one up again. That was my fault here. So once you are on the final payment of the order, so from here, if we look up a card that we have on file in this case, I have 2 different transaction types available. So payment would be the authorization that you run on the card. So you're putting a temporary hold on that $84 in this case, whereas a deposit would be an actual sale. With a deposit, you can define the amount that you want to charge. So if you ever have a situation where you're maybe taking 50% down or something like that, you can always plug in the amount that you want to actually charge. I would say a little more commonly, I find people pre-authorize at the time of the order. So we would default this to a payment if that was the case. And then submit card down below is what will run the transaction for you. So if we submit card right here, what we're ideally looking to get back is this authorization info and the transaction ID number. If something were to decline or fail, it'll actually give you a pop-up message that the card expired or the card declined or whatever the case was. A couple other things I should have pointed out right before I hit submit card. CVV is the security code on the back of the card. If that's something that anybody's concerned about or would normally enter, you can do that as well. We can also put filters if you wanted something like that to be required. Likewise, there is a send email option. Now, in most cases, that would be done when you're finalizing the charge. So in this situation, I'd probably do that at the invoice level, but that would send a copy of the credit card receipt when the card is submitted as well. So both of those can be options. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this order as is. And then whatever your turnaround time is, I'm going to go straight into invoicing it, but you may go through like customer shipment entry or something like that, which is totally fine. I'm going to look up the sales order that this is in reference to, and I'm going to just ship the whole thing. So what really matters here is the totals tab of the invoice. If anything was done already on the sales order, you would see credit card preset at the time of the invoice. If nothing had been run at the sales order, just be aware that you can always set the payment type to credit card on the invoice itself, and we could run the charge at this stage also. So a few different options you have there. If I come into the payment tab, because of the authorization, you can already see the approval info here. So there's nothing specific I really need to do. I can honestly just accept the invoice as is. If I wanted this to send a follow-up receipt when we capture, just make sure you have the box checked. If there had been no pre-authorization, then similar to what I did on the sales order, you would be able to look up a payment ID here or add a new card and run the sale at this time as well. So either way. So if we just go ahead and accept, at the time that you run your daily sales report and update or your sales journal, usually an end-of-day process I find for most merchants, that is when it will finalize all the transactions that are in that batch of invoices getting posted. So if you had to change anything last minute, you could always go back to the invoice and do so. Just realize that once the journal is run, that's when everything is pretty much final. So can't really make too many adjustments, at that point, but could always issue a refund, I suppose. So that is kind of your sales order to invoice workflow of when you might charge a card. Now, the alternative to that would be obviously charging the card after the fact. So if I had some invoices that were already posted, I would be able to come into my cash receipts entry, and this would allow me to pay off one or multiple invoices after the fact. You could technically take payments on account as well. So I don't know if anybody would ever have a need to do just like a miscellaneous payment on account for a customer, but this would also be a good way to go about something like that. So if I create a new batch here, and then when you create the deposit, you'll have an option for credit card deposit amount. I should point out as well, you'll notice this ACH deposit amount, so that could potentially be an option as well. In most cases, though, we tend to lean more towards the credit card side of this. So I'm going to just put 12 bucks for the sake of the test here. Obviously, if you're paying multiple invoices, that could be the sum total of everything to charge. We'll go ahead and look up the customer that this is for. It'll prompt you to create a new transaction entry number for the credit card deposit. So we'll just click the little next icon. And then the amount being received. So in my case, it's 12 bucks. Now, applying to the invoice is just standard Sage. You can use the auto apply function here, or you could go into lines and manually select the invoice that maybe we're paying off. So let's say we're going to add the $12 against this invoice balance. If I had multiple invoices, well, I would just continue selecting the different lines. So in the payment tab, this is pretty much identical to what we were just looking at from sales order or invoice level. I have, again, the ability to add a new payment ID if I wanted to do so here, or I could look up a payment ID that might have already been on file for that customer. You have the same options for the CVV code as well as sending an emailed receipt if you wanted to do something like that. Submitting the card is what will run the transaction. So as soon as you click this, we should see ideally the approval info come back. And so like you see right here. Again, if anything declined or errored out, you'd get a clear pop-up for that. So the only difference here is if you wanted to do this as a payment on account, we just would not apply to an actual invoice number. We would enter like a prepayment number instead, which is standard Sage 100, but just be aware you could do that with credit card as well. Now, this is obviously me running the charge as the merchant. You can also push this ability off to your customers to be able to pay the invoice themselves as well. So if you wanted to do something like that, when a sales order is created, you could do this at the invoice level too, but I think sales order is probably a little more common. You have standard terms codes available here. You'll notice in my situation, I have my net 30-day term. I also have something called Connect 30 or Email Pay 30. There's two different modules for having the customer pay themselves. The eBiz Connect, as we call it, is the full-blown customer portal, so it's a more robust option that would allow customers to pay multiple invoices, manage their own cards saved on file, look up payment history that they've made, stuff like that. Whereas email pay is a more simplified version if maybe it's a sporadic customer, not as frequently common. This would give them a one-time link. So all they do is enter their card info, but it is to pay one specific invoice amount. So obviously it's not as savvy for someone that may have multiple invoices or is a repeat customer. But it can be really useful for those one-off situations. So you would make sure that you set the appropriate term code if you want to push this on to the customer. And we would usually just make copies of your current term code, so you have that option available to differentiate. Once the invoice has been posted, so after you run the sales reports and update, inside of accounts receivable, there would be one end-of-day process that you would generally have someone go through. You'll notice that for the Connect portal, there is an invoice upload utility here. There is also a payment download utility. You have the same exact type of function for the email pay, which is the simplified form, where you can either send the invoice email pay request, or you can download the email pay payments. So depending on the terms code, you would have one or both of these potentially to be running. When invoices get uploaded or get sent out, you have a couple options here. We have automated email notifications that can be sent out to the customer if you wanted to use something like that from us. When the notification gets sent from the eBiz system, it would look similar to what you see here. It would usually reference your company name in the subject line, and then it would say like an invoice is ready for payment. The email address is going to look like it comes from you, not from our Sage 100 demo account. In the body of the email, the main things that we would be populating is the dollar amount, a potential due date, the company info, and then the invoice number as well. There optionally can be a mock-up invoice here that the customer could view, which would show them like the line item that was included, if there was any bill to, ship to, PO number, the invoice number, stuff like that. Of course, it would have your logo and company info up top. If you want to just send them the regular Sage invoice, you don't really like this mock-up for reference, then just be aware that we can always hide the little view invoice link as well. So then customers will have a button down below here, which would take them to one of two places. It's either going to take them to the customer portal to log in and they can pay their invoices, or it would take them to the simplified email payment page to pay that one particular invoice. So I'm going to log in to the customer portal side, and then I'll show you what the simplified email form would look like as well. So I'm going to pause my screen just for a second so I can grab my user login here, and then I'll show you guys what it looks like once we're logged in. Okay. So when the customer first gets here, I should mention, just be aware the URL address would be branded specific to whatever company we're setting up. So it would have like your merchant name here or an abbreviation. We would have it branded with your logo, and you could always swap out the secure payment image on the left as well. Your customers that come here would technically be able to create their own user login. It'll just ask them to verify a couple pieces of info. If anybody had issues creating the login, be aware that as the merchant, you would have administrative access to create a user login for them if that makes the process easier. So as soon as the card holder logs in, the interface that they're going to see is very similar to this. It would have the company logo up top. Down below, they would have a list of invoices that have been previously uploaded. It would have their invoice numbers, the due dates, which is looking at your term code, the amounts that are due, the customer ID, stuff like that. So as the card holder, I could select multiple invoices if I wanted to. It's going to give me the overall payment amount up top. Or I could just leave it selecting one invoice to pay if that happened to be the situation. Under pay by credit card, I would have a couple options of either entering like new card info one time here, or I could go to saved credit cards and select a card on file. Again, this list is overkill. You'd have, one or two cards usually for a customer. The nice thing about this, though, is it does share the same central database as Sage does for managing credit cards with eBiz. So your customer would be able to manage their own payment methods here. If they were to add a new payment method, it would pass that over to the customer in Sage for future use. Vice versa, if you had previously added a card in Sage, your customer would already have it available here as well. So that can be really useful as well. Enter security code, hit pay now, and ideally they're going to get an approval like this. Now, as soon as a transaction's approved, we could have it send you internal notifications in real time. So throughout the day, you're getting notified every time someone makes a payment so that you know that particular invoice was just paid. The alternative to that is there are end-of-day settlement reports, which I'll show you in a minute, and every transaction in your settlement report would also be labeled with where it originated. So it's going to have a label that says Sage or Customer Portal or Email Pay, or if anybody uses any other solutions like website e-commerce or something like that, we would have separate labels for each of those as well. So it's really helpful in the accounting side of reconciling and reporting these charges. So for the most part, a customer, maybe they print or email this page, but otherwise they click done. They'd probably be just logging out. They do technically have payment history reports, though, if they wanted to do something like that. I could say, what's everything I've paid so far this month, and it would give me a list of invoice payments, the cards I charged, the date that I paid them, stuff like that. Otherwise, though, I just log out. Now, if you happen to be using the simplified form, this was obviously the more robust customer portal we just looked at. The simplified form would look like this here. So when they click the link in the email, it would take them to a page that again is branded to you, has your company logo up top. The invoice info right here would be pre-filled. So all the customer has to do is key in their card info and hit pay now. Very simplistic. And again, we could have it notify you all the same. Just be aware, though, that this is a link specific to a particular invoice number. So if they had multiple invoices to pay, the portal is probably going to be a more user-friendly option for them. So in either scenario, when payments are made by the customer throughout the day, at the end of your day, usually is how you would do it, you would click the Connect Payment Download utility or the Email Pay Download utility, depending on what solutions you might be using. and that will download and create the cash receipts for all of the new payments that the customer has made since the last time you ran it. So it's best to run these on a daily basis just so your cash receipt records match the actual payment being made by the customer. But just be aware, even if you forgot to import for like a day or two or download payments, that they'll still be there. Just the cash receipt date, would be off by a day or two. When you run the download utilities, though, all you really need to do is run your cash receipt journal to post them. But if you wanted to double check anything, you could technically open up your cash receipt entry, and if you did a lookup of the batch, you would see batches created that have a reference like this. It would say eBiz charge auto batch. So that means it came from the utility of the customer paying their own invoices. If you wanted to open this up, you could honestly drill all the way into it. You'd find the credit card deposit here. You'd see the amount of the overall deposit. Within that deposit, you could always cycle through the different entries that got imported, the invoices that got paid, the credit card payment info. So you don't need to look at any of this, but you could if you want to preview it. For the most part, though, you just run the journal, once you've downloaded payments. So it's in bulk, right? There could be 20 new payments. You click the utility once and run your journal. So that is the concept behind the customer portal or the email payment function if you wanted to push that on the cardholder. The one other thing that we hadn't looked at yet, this is more credit card management, not so much processing a charge, but you could go into customer maintenance at any time. And in the additional tab, you have a credit card management button here. So what this will do is just let you add or delete a card on file. Maybe a card's getting updated or replaced. I could look up a card ID that pre-exists and I could delete it from here if I want to. Likewise, I could always select my payment method, Visa, let's say, and create a new card ID number. And then that would let me use like the add new card function to fill out the form here. So you could always do something like that as well. I think from the actual Sage interface of things, that is most of the process you would go through for running transactions. So the next thing I would usually show is the reporting gateway side, which is kind of the back end to all of this. Before I jump over there, though, I haven't been checking the chat throughout this process. So have there been any questions or anything that's come up so far? Sounds like maybe we're good.
Questions. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So the back-end reporting gateway where all these transactions flow into is going to be this eBiz charge site here. So obviously each merchant would have access to their specific environment. If I log in here and I take a look at my Sage activity, we'll see some of the transactions being processed for the day. One of the useful things here is this source column that you see. This is where we would label transactions as far as where they originated. So again, we call the customer portal eConnect, so you see that label here, but we could rename it to just say customer portal or email pay, or again, if you had like a shopping cart integration, something like that, versus these transactions that are just labeled Sage, which would mean that I ran that charge directly inside of Sage, sales order, invoice, cash receipt, however I did that. So all your charges throughout the day will settle in one overall batch. These settlements are usually set to auto close, minus 445. You could change that to whatever time works best for you. Inside of this options dropdown, you can export, print, or email. So if anybody likes hard copies of these reports, you could always do so. It will, however, keep an ongoing batch history. If I go into show all batches here, it'll show me a list of every settlement that I've ever had. If I wanted to drill into one of these older dates, it would then show me the breakdown of all the charges for that day and the source as far as where they came from. This is actually a good example where you can see like Sage, you can see this was done on the customer portal, this was the simplified email pay form, and every transaction will always have reference to like the invoice number the customer that made that payment, stuff like that, so you know what to expect back inside of Sage when you do the download. Now, this batch manager is 1 day at a time that we're looking at right now. If anybody is looking for date range, like month-end type reports, you can go into reports here. There's some really nice pre-made reports available where you can look up sales by date. You could have sales sectioned out based on that source column if you wanted to, errors, declines, different stuff like that. So sales by date's a pretty generic one that a lot of people look at. You can come in here and select your own date range, whatever you're looking for. And then down below, you'll notice how it kind of breaks up the individual charges. So it would show you the charges for that day and the total to settle, and it would do that for, you know, the entire month or whatever you're looking at. Again, it is possible to get hard copies if you wanted to export, print, or email this. Keep in mind, we do also have custom reports available, excuse me. So if any of the filters you have here of the transaction detail maybe doesn't quite match what you were looking for, you can always customize the display of these reports as well. There is also a generic search column up top. So if you were looking for a specific payment, as long as you have the invoice number or the dollar amount, the last four of the card, maybe even something like the customer ID number, you can always do a generic search. If I just typed in like 120 bucks, for instance, this will pull up everything I've done, you know, based on that dollar amount there. However, if I was maybe looking for based on a customer, I could type like Shepherd here. And in this case, it finds everything based on this Shepherd customer or the customer ID being Shepherd. So just know there's a bunch of different ways you can search. Pretty much anything that ties back to the charge, you should be able to filter out. The last thing in here is we do have fraud modules available as well. So if anybody wanted to put any sort of restrictions or filters in place, some of the common ones might be like requiring security codes to be correct or require that billing info on a customer card matches. We can always set filters to that, but it really is up to you as the individual merchant what you do or don't want to filter. So those options are there though. I think that is probably just about everything as far as the way that transactions are run and that it connects back into your batch here. I guess the only other thing to point out really quick, just in case anybody might be questioning this, when we do the install for you, and we will walk through this with you, part of the setup is going to be your different credit card payment types, like Visa, for instance. You can have these set to whatever ledger account you like, which is based on the asset account linked here. So just be aware from an accounting standpoint, if you want those to go through like some sort of credit card clearing account or go straight to a cash account, you can define that accordingly as well. And so then you know where your transactions are posting. I think otherwise that's really it. So if there's any other questions that have come up, we can cover that now, or if everything seems good, I think that's probably the most of it.
So if anybody has questions, you can use the GoToWebinar tool to click and raise your hand, or if you want to submit them via chat, we can read your questions that way. For both Matt and Justin, are there any common questions that Sage 100 users ask as they go through demonstrations like this?
Yeah, I think some of the common ones might be in regards to just general compliance, right? So we kind of touched on that before, but just to reiterate, you know, none of these cards are getting stored locally on your server. So it does keep everything up to compliance. We're housing the data through eBizCharge and storing just that token reference back in Sage. So that is something that some people concern about. The installation process or time is another question. So it's fairly straightforward. When we go to install someone, we really just need access to the Sage server. We can go through the install with you or with your Sage consultant, however you'd want to set that up. And I would say it usually takes about 45 minutes to do the switchover. We would run a test to make sure it's working, and then we usually schedule to do user training right after, so that way it's a little more hands-on. If anybody wants to be installed in like a test environment to maybe poke around in first, we're always open to do something like that as well. And then obviously we could, switch you over live when you're ready. I think a lot of the other questions outside of that tend to be very specific to someone's workflow, or maybe there might be questions regarding other solutions that they have if they do any sort of like shopping cart transactions or something, and they would like that to also go with eBiz. But I think otherwise that's pretty generic for Sage. It's a very straightforward integration, so nothing too complicated there.
All right. Well, I want to thank both Matt and Justin for their time today. We are recording this demonstration, and all the attendees will receive an email with a link to the recording, and we'll also have contact information. That way, if you do have additional questions, you'll have the name and contact information for a person that can help you with that. Other than that, I don't see any other questions from the attendees. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll go ahead and sign off.
All right. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.